What's up, Sharks? This is Mr. O moving on with your next set of flip notes, which is the first after our flower reproduction unit and our plant processing unit. We're going to move on to something that's a little bit more familiar to you, which is food chains, food webs, and ecosystems. Something that you just got done with in fifth grade. I think you touched upon in a few different grades, but the more you remember, the easier this will be for you. In Composition Notebook, page number 11, food chains, food webs, and ecosystems flipped. And what you see up top is what this slide's showing you is how I'm going to run these flip notes. I'm basically going to give you a header, which would be, for example, matter. And I will tell you what you need to know about matter when it relates to this unit. A couple of them will be just in general about ecosystems, but most of them will be about food chains and food webs. All but two are food chain, food web driven. So let's get started. Matter. Two things you need to know about matter. Matter is anything that has shape and volume or mass and volume. I'm sorry. And matter in ecosystem is transferred from one organism to another, and is also transferred between organisms and the environment. Now think about this: when something eats something else, it's transferring from one organism to another. However, when an organism dies, it transfers that to the environment. Also, like when an organism poops, also transferring matter to the environment. So matter, lots of different things. You can never give enough examples of matter. You'd be here all day and all night for the rest of your lives, and you'd not even come close. There's the bell, so you know I'm in school taping this. But those are the two things you need to know about matter. We'll talk more about matter when we get to the matter unit. The next is water, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. These are things that are cycled between living and non-living things. You should have learned the water cycle last year. I know they preach that to you harder and harder about the condensation, evaporation, precipitation, transpiration. That's the water cycle. Carbon cycle does the same thing. You hear about carbon footprint. Oxygen cycle between things. We talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We talk about the cycling of these things. This is just letting you know that all these things are cycled between non-living and living things. The next heading would be food or glucose. For all living things, this provides two things. It provides building materials, which means things you grow with, and it provides fuel, which means energy. This is where the cellular respiration from last unit comes into play in this unit. So what we're learning about still is growing into new things where you have no permission to forget that content. Energy. You should have learned about ecosystems last year that energy in an ecosystem flows in one direction. It flows from the sun to those producers, which are green plants, which photosynthesis are producers, to consumers, which is you and I, meaning you have to consume your food to get energy, and then to decomposers, those gross things that eat dead things but they poop out nutrients, bringing back our soil unit. So this is a really cool collection of how our different units have played into one statement, that second statement there. Moving on to the sun, and I'm really focusing on sunlight, and that provides energy for plants to make glucose. Here's the connection with photosynthesis. Without that sun making glucose in plants, we wouldn't be here. Without producers, we wouldn't be here. This is why green plants can depend on no one else, but we depend on plants, going back to photosynthesis. Food chain and food webs. If you did not know the difference, here is the difference. Food chains are just one thing, like one literal line. Grass eaten by cow, eaten by the wolf, and the wolf dies and eaten by maggots. However, in a food web, you're taking a subsection of an area, meaning your backyard, and listing out every possible connection of every possible thing eating everything. So there's not just one thing that eats grass in your backyard. There might be 3 or 4 things, and then there might be 3 or 4 things that eat those things, and so on and so forth. Hence making a web, just like a spider web. But a web just consists of multiple food chains. So they're kind of similar, but they're a little bit different because the web is a lot more complex. Moving on to green plants. They are producers of food that are used directly or indirectly by all consumers. Directly would be the animals that literally eat the grass, and then indirectly are all the animals that don't eat grass, so they're not herbivores, but they're either omnivores or carnivores, and they eat animals that do eat the grass to get the energy from them. So going back, reiterating that statement that green plants are vitally important for all living things on Earth because we either directly or indirectly eat them. Producers are the things that enjoy energy from the sun, feed photosynthesis here, and they produce their own food. They're called producers because they can produce their own food. If you didn't make that connection last year, please do so this year. Photosynthesis allows you to make your own food. Producers allows you to Make their own food, we eat them. What eats producers? Well, there's consumers. Last year, you went through a variety of things about different level of consumers, primary, secondary, tertiary. This year, you just need to know consumers eat things that consume glucose so they can get glucose from them in order to survive. My favorite are the gross little guys, which is decomposers. They literally break down dead organisms and return it to the soil. This is the soil unit connection. So I like this set of slides because you get to see how our units are starting to make their way back through each of our parts here. So that's the end of the flip notes. I will see you in class tomorrow. Any questions, please write them down. I will have a 5-minute question and answer session with this section of notes before we get started. Thank you.